You remember the feeling of walking into class on the very first day? The room was buzzing with noise. Kids laughing, chairs scraping, voices bouncing back and forth. Some children ran straight to the center, striking up conversations with ease. But you stood at the door, gripping the straps of your backpack, your heart racing, wishing someone would notice you, call your name, make you feel less invisible. No one did. So you sat down quietly, kept your eyes low, and tried to disappear. That's the daily reality for many shy children. From an early age, they live with what feels like an invisible wall between themselves and the rest of the world. Inside their mind, there are words, thoughts, and answers ready to spill out. But their body reacts differently. Sweaty palms, a face that flushes red, a throat that closes tight. And so, instead of stepping forward, they retreat. Psychologists call this a highly reactive nervous system, a trait some children are born with. Research by Harvard psychologist Jerome Kagan found that roughly 20% of infants come into the world with heightened sensitivity. For these children, situations that seem normal to others, being called on in class, joining a group, feeling eyes on them, trigger the brain's alarm system. The body responds as if danger is near, even when nothing is wrong. If you were that child, you know this double-edged feeling well. The deep longing to connect mixed with the paralyzing fear of exposure. You wanted to raise your hand, but by the time you formed the sentence, the teacher had already moved on. You wanted to say hello, but your feet felt glued to the ground. Slowly, you learned a lesson that felt like survival. Silence is safer than risk. The outside world rarely sees this truth. Teachers write, needs to speak up. Parents sigh, why can't you be more confident? Peers label you as the quiet one, the shy kid, the one who never talks. Words like these pile up over time, until shyness is no longer just a reaction, it becomes a story you tell about yourself. I'm invisible. I don't belong. I don't have a voice worth hearing. But here's the hidden truth. A shy child is not empty, not weak, not broken. They are carrying a mind that notices what others miss. While the world races to fill silence, they observe. They hear the hesitation in a voice, the sadness behind a smile, the shifting mood in a room. What looks like withdrawal is often a different way of engaging, a quieter rhythm, a deeper form of attention. If you're watching this, you might see yourself in this description. Maybe you still carry the memory of your heart pounding when the teacher warned, "If no one answers, I'll call on someone at random." Maybe you remember the dread of reading out loud, or the silent panic of class discussions where everyone else spoke freely while you sat frozen. These moments weren't small to you. They shaped the way you see yourself. And yet, the truth hidden behind a shy child is not that they lack desire. It's that every step forward feels 10 times heavier because of an invisible fear they didn't choose. And when that fear repeats itself over and over through childhood, it doesn't just fade away, it leaves a mark. So the question is, what happens to a child who grows up believing silence is safer than being seen? That is the truth we'll uncover next. When we talk about shyness, most people think of it as a simple personality trait, quiet, reserved, maybe a little awkward. But the truth is far more complex. Shyness is not just a personality type. It is a psychological and physiological response to the social world. Let's start with the body. When a shy child is asked to introduce themselves in front of class, their brain doesn't interpret it as a neutral request. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear, switches on almost immediately. Stress hormones like adrenaline surge, their heart begins to race, their hands turn clammy. To the outside observer, it looks like hesitation. Inside, their nervous system is reacting as if they are standing face to face with danger. For a shy child, the danger isn't a predator, it's the eyes of other people. Harvard psychologist Jerome Kagan spent decades studying what he called behavioral inhibition. His research showed that about 15–20% of infants are born with more reactive nervous systems. From the earliest months, these babies startled more easily, cried longer when exposed to new stimuli, and clung tighter in unfamiliar environments. Many of these children grew into shy adolescents and adults. In other words, shyness often begins as biology, not a lack of willpower or effort. But it's important to clarify, shyness is not destiny. Psychologists make a clear distinction between shyness, introversion, and social anxiety. Introversion describes where you draw energy, from solitude and reflection rather than crowds. Introverts can still be confident speakers, they just don't want to socialize endlessly. Shyness is the discomfort, the tension that rises in social situations, especially under attention. Social anxiety is when that discomfort becomes so intense that it interferes with daily life, avoiding school, skipping opportunities, isolating from relationships. As Dr. Bernardo Carducci, director of the Shyness Research Institute at Indiana University, once said, "Shyness is not a disease, it is a way of responding to the world." This reminder matters because too often shy children are treated as if something is wrong with them, rather than as individuals who simply process social experience differently. Another hidden truth is that shy children are not uninterested in connection. In fact, studies suggest they crave belonging just as deeply, sometimes even more, than their outgoing peers. The problem isn't lack of desire, it's fear. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, in his book Shyness, What It Is, What to Do About It, described this as the paradox of shyness, wanting closeness while simultaneously fearing it. This paradox is why many shy children feel caught in a constant push and pull, longing to step forward, yet frozen by the weight of self-consciousness. A study in the Journal of Child Development found that shy children often describe their experience not only through emotions, but through sensations, the pounding of the heart, the flush of the cheeks, the tightening of the throat. Shyness is not just being quiet. It is the body and mind combining to make social steps feel 10 times heavier. From an evolutionary perspective, shyness may have once been a survival strategy. Caution, sensitivity, and careful observation would have protected early humans from danger. What we now label as shyness may in fact be an echo of an ancient survival instinct. In today's classrooms and workplaces, that same sensitivity can become a struggle, but it also remains a hidden strength. This is why it's so important to look deeper. A shy child who avoids eye contact or doesn't raise their hand isn't empty or incapable. They are wired differently. Their nervous system lights up in ways that make simple acts like speaking in front of a group feel overwhelming, and yet, the same wiring gives them unique gifts: attentiveness, empathy, the ability to notice what others overlook. If you've ever been the shy child, you know these feelings well. The frustration of being compared to louder classmates, the exhaustion of bracing yourself for presentations or group discussions, the ache of wanting to belong while feeling held back by something you couldn't name. But remember this: shyness is not a flaw. It's part of your design. Understanding that truth is the first step toward changing your relationship with silence. Ask yourself this: how many times have you stayed silent in a meeting, even though the answer was already in your head? How many times have you wanted to start a conversation, to share how you really felt, but pulled back because you feared being judged? If you grew up as the shy child, chances are you're still carrying those reflexes today. This is the hidden mark childhood leaves behind. It's not just about classroom memories or playground games. It's about a psychological habit that became ingrained. Psychologists call this a negative self-circophy, the mental blueprint we build about ourselves through repetition. As a child, you may have heard again and again, "Speak up, you're too quiet, you need more confidence." Eventually, those words stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like truth. And by adulthood, that schema still whispers, "Your voice doesn't matter." Science backs this up. A study in the Journal of Abnormal Child Psychology found that shy children tend to show higher cortisol levels, the stress hormone, especially in social settings. Here's the problem. This heightened alertness doesn't simply vanish with age, it becomes the body's default mode. That may be why, even now, your heart pounds when you're called on unexpectedly, or your face flushes the moment attention turns to you. Your body remembers social situations as threats, even when your mind knows they're safe. And while that survival strategy may have helped you get through childhood, adulthood demands more. You're no longer facing spelling tests or group projects. You're navigating job interviews, presentations, relationships, and difficult conversations. And it's here that childhood shyness turns into a present-day barrier. Maybe you've missed out on opportunities at work because you couldn't bring yourself to speak up. Maybe you've let relationships slip away because you couldn't risk admitting your feelings. Or maybe you've learned to wear a mask of politeness, always agreeable, always available, but rarely honest about your own needs. This doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're still carrying the imprint of your early experiences. Psychologists describe this as high self-monitoring, the tendency to constantly watch yourself, judge your every word, replay every interaction in your head. One glance from someone else, one offhand comment, can spiral into hours of overthinking. Did I say something wrong? What do they think of me? Living in this hyper-awarenessness is exhausting, and over time, silence feels safer than risking exposure. But here's the paradox. Shyness doesn't mean emptiness. It doesn't mean you have nothing to share. In fact, many shy people are some of the most observant, thoughtful, and empathetic individuals. The problem is not a lack of value. It's that society has rarely recognized the quiet kind of value you bring. Psychologist Kenneth Rubin, who studied socially withdrawn children, noted that many shy kids grow into adults with extraordinary empathy and sensitivity. They can read the room, notice subtle shifts in tone, pick up on emotions others miss. But that same sensitivity also makes them vulnerable. They become the quiet friend who supports everyone else, but rarely asks for support themselves. Does that sound familiar? So the impact of childhood shyness isn't frozen in the past, it lives in your present. It's there in the opportunities you hesitate to seize, the relationships that feel unbalanced, the voice you still struggle to trust. And yet, the hidden truth is this: you were never invisible. You simply carry a nervous system that's too sensitive and a story that hasn't yet been rewritten. The real question then is, what happens when silence stops being just a temporary reaction and becomes a lifelong habit? What happens when a shy child grows into an adult convinced that hiding is safer than being seen? Shyness doesn't just stay in childhood, it grows with you. What begins as hesitation in a classroom often becomes a pattern of avoidance in adulthood, and the more you avoid, the stronger the habit becomes. Psychologists call this a self-reinforcing cycle. The very behaviors you use to protect yourself from discomfort end up keeping the discomfort alive. Here's how it works. A shy child feels anxious about speaking in class. To ease that anxiety, they stay silent. In the short term, this feels safe, but in the long term, it teaches the brain. Silence equals safety. Speaking equals danger. Each time the child avoids, the fear is reinforced. Years later, the same mechanism shows up in adulthood. avoiding meetings, skipping social events, holding back feelings in relationships. The short-term relief keeps feeding the long-term fear. Neuroscience explains why this loop is so hard to break. When you avoid something scary, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, calms down, rewarding you with relief. That relief acts like a reward signal, telling your brain, yes, this was the right choice. But each repetition makes the amygdala even more sensitive the next time. This is why shy adults often say, the more I avoid, the harder it gets. Avoidance shrinks your world, little by little. A study in the Journal of Anxiety Disorders found that individuals with chronic shyness often engage in what's called safety behaviors, actions designed to prevent embarrassment, like rehearsing every sentence in your head before speaking, avoiding eye contact, or laughing along even when you disagree. These behaviors seem protective, but they send a hidden message to your brain. I can't handle this without a crutch. Over time, this message chips away at confidence. You may recognize this in your own life. Perhaps you avoid networking events because the thought of small talk makes your stomach turn, or maybe you've held back from pursuing a promotion because it requires public speaking. Maybe you've let friendships drift away because reaching out felt too risky. In each case, the cycle repeats. The fear creates avoidance. The avoidance creates relief. The relief strengthens the fear. What makes the cycle especially painful is the paradox inside it. Shy people often long for connection, friendship, recognition, yet the very behaviors they use to feel safe, silence, withdrawal, invisibility, are the same ones that keep them unseen. It's like standing behind a glass wall. You can see the world, you want to join it, but every attempt feels blocked by an invisible barrier. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo described this as the shyness trap. The more you focus on how others might judge you, the more self-conscious you become, and the more likely you are to stay silent. His research showed that shy individuals spend an extraordinary amount of energy monitoring themselves rather than engaging with others. This internal focus makes social interaction even harder, reinforcing the belief that they don't belong. The tragedy of the cycle is not just the lost opportunities, but the way it shapes identity. When avoidance becomes routine, it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like who you are. I'm not someone who speaks up. I'm not someone who takes risks. I'm not someone who belongs in the spotlight. These aren't truths. They're conclusions drawn from years of repetition, but to the person living them, they feel permanent. And yet, there's another side to this story. Research on exposure therapy has shown that the very cycle that maintains shyness can also be reversed. When shy individuals take small, safe steps toward the things they fear, raising a hand once in class, sharing a thought in a meeting, making eye contact for a few seconds, the brain begins to learn a new association. Speaking up doesn't always lead to danger. Each step rewires the amygdala slightly, proving that the cycle can be loosened. This doesn't mean the journey is easy. Breaking the cycle of shyness often feels like swimming upstream against years of conditioning. But it does mean that shyness is not destiny. As one participant in a long-term study on social anxiety put it, every time I spoke, my fear didn't vanish, but the world didn't collapse either. And that was enough to try again. So the cycle of shyness is powerful, but not unbreakable. It begins as a child's survival strategy and can linger into adulthood, shaping choices, relationships, and identity. But the same sensitivity that once fueled fear can also fuel growth, if met with patience, practice, and compassion. The real question then is this: how do we take those first small steps out of the cycle? How can a shy child, or the shy child still inside you, begin to rewrite the story? Think about the last time you wanted to speak up but didn't. Maybe it was in a meeting where your idea could have made a difference, or in a relationship where you wanted to be honest but stayed silent. You walked away with relief, no spotlight, no embarrassment. But later, lying in bed, that relief turned sour. You replayed the moment, regretted your silence, and wondered, why can't I just say it? That's the cycle of shyness in real time. The fear rises, you avoid, you feel safer. But then you regret it, which reinforces the belief that your voice doesn't belong. And the more this pattern repeats, the more it feels like who you are. Breaking it, then, isn't about forcing yourself to suddenly be loud and fearless. It's about learning how to interrupt the cycle with small intentional steps. Psychologists call this process gradual exposure. It means training your nervous system step by step to tolerate the spotlight. Instead of setting a huge goal like be confident, you start with something tiny. Share one thought in a meeting, ask one question in class, tell a friend one truth about how you're feeling. Each time you do this, your brain records a new memory. I spoke and nothing terrible happened. Over time, these small wins start to rewire the fear loop. Science supports this. A study in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology showed that people who practiced gradual exposure reported lasting decreases in social anxiety. Not because the fear disappeared overnight, but because each step taught their brain a new lesson. Discomfort doesn't equal danger. But action alone isn't enough. Many shy adults carry an inner critic that's louder than any audience. You might know this voice well. I sounded stupid. They noticed I was nervous. I should have done better. Psychologists call it negative self-talk, and research shows it keeps shyness alive long after the moment has passed. One way to fight it is through cognitive reframing, shifting how you interpret the event. Instead of I failed, try I spoke once, and that's progress. It sounds simple, but the way you talk to yourself can determine whether you try again or retreat further. Self-compassion is another key. Dr. Kristin Neff's research found that people who treat themselves with kindness when they struggle show greater resilience. For you, this might mean replacing "what's wrong with me" with "it's normal that I feel nervous. This is hard for me, but I'm learning." That small act of compassion quiets the critic and gives courage room to grow. You can also rehearse. If speaking up feels terrifying, don't wait until the big moment. Practice with a friend. Record yourself saying what you want to say. Run through the conversation in a safe space. Studies show that behavioral rehearsal lowers anxiety because your brain gets used to the experience before it actually happens. It's like training for a marathon with short practice runs. Connection matters too. Shyness thrives in isolation, but when you share your truth with someone who listens without judgment, the cycle loosens. Research from the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that even one supportive friendship can buffer the effects of shyness, reducing loneliness and increasing self-esteem. Every time someone responds with kindness, it's a corrective experience. Proof that being seen doesn't always hurt. And here's the most important part. Breaking the cycle doesn't mean becoming someone you're not. It doesn't mean turning into the loudest person in the room. It means giving yourself permission to exist fully, whether you speak softly, slowly, or not at all. As author Susan Cain wrote in Quiet, the secret to life is to put yourself in the right lighting. For some, it's a Broadway spotlight. For others, a lamplit desk. So maybe your path starts with something as small as sending that message you've been avoiding, or speaking one sentence in tomorrow's meeting. These aren't just actions, they're new stories you're teaching your nervous system. Stories that say, I can be here, I can speak, I don't have to hide. Breaking the cycle of shyness won't erase nerves, but it will stop nerves from deciding your life. And with each step, you'll discover that beneath the fear, there is not emptiness, but strength. The kind of strength that grows quietly until one day, you realize your voice has been here all along. When you think of shyness, your first thought might be weakness, the words you didn't say, the chances you didn't take, the spotlight you avoided. But what if that's only half the story? What if the very traits that once held you back also carry a hidden power? Here's the truth. Being shy doesn't erase your strengths, it often reshapes them. And if you look closely at your own life, you might notice qualities that others overlook. Think about how much you notice in a room. While others rush to fill silence, you watch. You read expressions. You catch the subtle shift in tone when someone says, "I'm fine," but really isn't. This isn't just personality, it's psychology. Studies on social sensitivity show that shy individuals often score higher in reading nonverbal cues. In other words, your silence has trained you to see what others miss. And in a world where empathy is rare, that's not a weakness, that's a gift. Empathy itself is another hidden strength. Because you felt what it's like to be overlooked, you're more attuned to others who feel the same. Research published in the Journal of Personality found that shy people often report higher levels of perspective taking, the ability to imagine someone else's feelings. That explains why you may be the friend people confide in, the colleague who notices when someone's struggling, the partner who picks up on what isn't being said. Creativity too often grows in quiet soil. Many writers, artists, and scientists have described their shyness not as a barrier but as a space for deeper thought. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who studied creativity for decades, observed that those who prefer solitude often generate more original ideas because they spend time reflecting. So if you've ever felt that your best ideas come when you're alone, that's not an accident. It's the shy mind at work. Even in leadership, shyness has strengths. It may sound contradictory, but research from Harvard Business School found that introverted leaders often outperform extroverted ones when leading proactive teams. Why? Because instead of dominating, they listen, they empower, they create space for others to shine. If you've ever been told you're too quiet to lead, know this: leadership isn't volume, it's presence. And presence doesn't always need to be loud. You might still wonder, if shyness has all these strengths, why does it feel so heavy? Because for most of your life, you've been told it's wrong. You've been taught to measure yourself against the extroverted ideal, the confident speaker, the social butterfly, the one who owns the room. When your strengths didn't look like theirs, you assumed you had none at all. But the truth is, you were playing a different game all along. Susan Cain, in her book Quiet, put it this way: there's zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. Yet society often mistakes noise for value. That doesn't mean your voice doesn't matter. It means the world hasn't always known how to listen. So how do you reclaim these hidden strengths in your own life? First, by naming them. Start noticing the ways your quietness helps you see more deeply, connect more sincerely, create more thoughtfully. Second, by reframing. Instead of saying, "I'm too shy," try saying, "I take time before I speak," or "I listen deeply." Those aren't flaws, they're qualities. Finally, by practicing balance. Shyness becomes a problem when it silences you completely, but when paired with courage, even in small doses, it becomes a strength that's both rare and powerful. Think of it this way: shyness gave you sensitivity, but courage gives that sensitivity a voice. Together, they create something the world desperately needs: empathy with action, observation with contribution, depth with presence. So if you've spent years believing that your shyness makes you less, let this be your reminder. It's not an absence, it's not emptiness, it's a different form of intelligence, a quieter kind of strength. The real work isn't to erase it, it's to recognize it, honor it, and then use it in ways that feel true to you. And maybe the bigger question is this: if shyness has shaped your challenges, how might it also shape your gifts? That's the paradox we'll explore next. The way embracing your quiet nature can actually become the path to your most authentic life. Maybe you've tried to fix your shyness before. You told yourself you had to be louder, braver, more like the people who seem to glide through conversations without effort. You walked into a room determined to act confident, only to leave exhausted and ashamed because it didn't feel natural. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Many shy adults live with the belief that who they are is somehow wrong, that shyness is a flaw to erase. But here's the turning point. True growth doesn't come from erasing yourself. It comes from accepting yourself. Psychologists call this process self-acceptance, the ability to recognize your temperament, your emotions, your fears, and your strengths without constant judgment. Research published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology found that higher levels of self-acceptance are strongly correlated with lower levels of anxiety and depression. In other words, when you stop fighting who you are, the weight begins to lift. So what does self-acceptance look like in real life? It often starts small. It's noticing that your hands are sweating before you speak and saying, "Of course they are. I'm nervous, and that's okay." It's choosing to celebrate the fact that you spoke at all, instead of criticizing the way your voice shook. It's allowing yourself to take breaks in social situations without labeling yourself as weak. Self-acceptance doesn't mean you stop growing. It means you stop punishing yourself for not growing fast enough. Think about how you talk to yourself after a hard day. Do you replay every awkward pause? Do you call yourself names? Stupid, boring, pathetic? Imagine saying those words to a child. You wouldn't. You'd comfort them. You'd reassure them that it's okay to be scared. You'd remind them that they're still worthy. Self-acceptance means learning to speak to yourself with that same compassion. As Dr. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion shows, people who treat themselves with kindness recover from setbacks more quickly and are more likely to try again. Another part of this journey is reframing shyness not as a defect, but as a style of being. Psychologists distinguish between shyness, introversion, and social anxiety, but in everyday life the lines blur. What matters most is how you view your own rhythm. Instead of seeing silence as emptiness, you can begin to see it as presence. Instead of seeing caution as weakness, you can see it as thoughtfulness. This reframing doesn't erase challenges, but it allows you to carry them with dignity instead of shame. Culture plays a role too. In many Western societies, extroversion is celebrated as the gold standard of success. But in Eastern traditions, silence and modesty are often linked with wisdom. The same trait that feels like a burden in one culture may be seen as respect in another. The psychologist Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Self-acceptance means realizing that you don't have to conform to one cultural script to be valuable. Of course, this isn't easy. Self-acceptance doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice. Some days you'll feel confident. Other days you'll fall back into old habits of self-criticism. That's part of the process. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a series of circles, revisiting old wounds with a little more wisdom each time. What matters is that with each circle, you judge yourself less and understand yourself more. Practical ways to nurture this acceptance include journaling about small victories, practicing mindfulness to notice your inner critic without fusing with it, and seeking supportive spaces where your quiet nature is valued. Therapy, too, can provide a mirror that reflects back your worth more clearly than you can see on your own. The truth is, self-acceptance doesn't mean you stop feeling shy. It means you stop letting shame define your shyness. You recognize that while your nervous system may react strongly to social situations, you are more than those reactions. You are the person who has survived them, learned from them, and is still here, listening, searching for healing. So as you reflect on your own journey, ask yourself, what would it feel like to stop running from shyness and start walking with it? What would it mean to stop treating it as an enemy and start treating it as a part of your story? Because the moment you begin to accept it, you reclaim the energy you once spent hiding, and you can finally begin to live more fully as yourself. If you grew up shy, you probably carry the memory of staying quiet even when you had something to say. Maybe it was in class, maybe later in meetings or in relationships. Silence felt safe in the moment, but over time it built a story. I don't belong in the spotlight. Psychology shows us that this story can change. The brain is plastic. It rewires every time you take small steps forward. A study from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child found that resilience grows not by avoiding struggle, but by facing it in safe, supportive environments. Each time you speak, even one sentence, you're reshaping the old loop of fear. And remember, shyness isn't emptiness. It has given you empathy, observation, and creativity. Albert Einstein once said, "The monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind." Rosa Parks changed history not with volume, but with quiet courage. Your strength may not look like noise, but it carries weight when you choose to use it. Self-acceptance is the key. As Carl Rogers wrote, "When I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." You don't need to erase your shy nature. You only need to stop treating it as a flaw. When you speak, even softly, people listen, because your words come from depth, not performance. So next time your heart races and your palms sweat, pause and remind yourself, this isn't danger, it's growth. The shy child you once were is still waiting, not to be erased, but to be heard. And when you let that child speak, you'll find that you were never truly invisible. You were simply waiting for the right moment to step forward. Being shy has never meant you were broken. It meant you felt the world more intensely. That sensitivity, when embraced, can become a quiet strength. Here on this channel, we explore the psychology behind those hidden struggles and how to heal from them together. If this spoke to you, know you're not alone. Take one small step today to honor your voice. And if you'd like to continue this journey, consider subscribing and joining our community of gentle growth.